This is your home for St. Cloud State hockey, keeping you up to date on the NCHC.
One-timer coming, they score! Ripped in! A bomb from Pervix!
Women's WCHA.
So Dana Rasmussen fires and she scores! Dana Rasmussen for the Huskies alongside
The National Hockey League.
Dwayne Kaprizov in for a chance to win it! He scores! Kirill, the thrill is for real! Welcome to the NHL, a game winner!
And everything from the state of hockey.
St. Cloud Cathedral is now 42.6 seconds away from wrapping up the school's first ever title.
Welcome to the Huskies Warming House Podcast Den. The Huskies Warming House podcast is also brought to you by the Soda Pod, home of NCAA college hockey news and more. Stay wild and up to date with new episodes throughout every week. Find them on Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and other podcast platforms. Welcome into the Huskies Warming House podcast, episode 206. Nick Maxon alongside Noah Grant here. And Nick, we are decidedly not dead. We are doing much better than we were last week, to say the least. If you listened to the open last week, I'm sorry. I know I look like shit, and that's coming from someone who looks like that normally. Nick, on the other side, we've recovered our voices. How are you doing? Let the listeners at home who aren't on the YouTube show know that you are here.
It was rough because NCAA, I actually did not record with the Big Ten crew because the voice was super raspy, and then I probably should not have for the other two, but let's just say the other two require a little bit more managing. So and just to make sure we could put a show out, I did what I could. We'll put it that way, but it didn't sound great. It's better now. It's not 100%, but it's 95. But yeah, we're kicking, we're breathing. That's either good news or bad news, depending on how you ask. But here we are. So
yeah, here we are, episode 206, the second to last full show in show history, and what a good one it is. We are actually fresh off of recording this on Sunday, April 7th. If you pay attention to next week, our final guest for the Huskies Warming House podcast, head coach of the men's team, Brett Larson. We just sat down with him about 10 minutes ago. So had a really great discussion with him and a lot of really interesting things that are going to come out of that as well too. Couldn't thank him enough for his time, as well as today's guest, Ben Holden, as well as we go through the mix. We'll talk a lot about NCAAs, recap our regionals, take a look at Nick and I's bracket challenge, and of course try to predict the Frozen Four. So without further ado, Center Ice View news and notes presented by HuskiesIllustrated.com and the Soda Pod. Center Ice View news and notes. Center Ice View provides you with the best coverage of St. Cloud State Huskies hockey, from game notes, recaps, photos, and more. Go to centericeview.com. Episode 206, Noah Grant alongside Nick Maxon here. And Nick, the NCAA regionals, I'm a little chapped, I'll be honest with you, as a betting man. I thought about having a little bit of fun. I thought, you know what?
Yep.
I'm going to stick with my guns. I'm going to put $100 down on an 8-leg parlay and say, and see, $100. I had $100 to play with. If I would have gotten all 8 right, I would have made $2,500. Well, you know what? I got 7 of them right, and I got $0, and I'm very unhappy about it. It's fine. Screw you, Maine.
That's almost worse, right? When you're up by 1 instead of just getting you're 1 in and then 2 goes down, so you know what's dead there.
Yeah,
right?
like if I would have went 5 out of 8, I would have been like, I didn't really expect much out of it. But and honestly, the drama with the Michigan State game on the first night too, a big massive comeback, all that jazz. We'll talk about bracket challenge in just a few moments, but I guess overall takeaway, Nick, before we're going to dive into each regional separately, take a look at the Frozen Four upcoming, and then bracket challenge as well too, before we get to Ben Holden, who graciously took his time to sit down with us on the show. Overall impressions of the regionals, a lot of overtime games, Nick.
They weren't like last year.
Yeah, they were
That
better.
said, We talked about it last week, I think, knowing that is, the parity, the top 8, the top 9 teams, there wasn't, shall we say, the universal number 1 team this year. There was a lot of depth in the top 10 in college hockey. And we saw that, right? We didn't see the 8-1 blowouts or the 9-2. In fact, BU and BC both had to kind of fight through a little bit of those first game. I'm going to call them jitters or just nerves, but when they settled down, especially was it late first and then second period on, you could see the game come together for both those squads. But I mean, good hockey all around, I think. I think every game was enjoyable. We'll talk about crowd sizes probably never because they were still a problem. But at the end of the day, I liked the games that I watched. I really thought that, even though some, not very many, you could see, okay, this team's pulling away. It was the team that we expected to win, but, it wasn't early on, like where you could see it was 3 or 4-0 after 10 minutes of play. And, it was a boring watch. These were all good hockey games. And I do think in a lot of these games, the rightful better hockey team came out on top.
Well, really, the only game that got away from start to finish was probably the Michigan Tech BC game, which was to maybe be expected. Even RIT gave BU a bit of a run for their money early on too. Very much, we're getting more into the territory of Minnesota Canisius and Fargo vibes, right? Where games are a little bit closer to the first 35-40, and I think that's great for college hockey. Let's jump into the regionals here, and let's talk about that Providence Regional, the Michigan Tech game aforementioned. 6-1 was the final score. The BC Eagles get it done. No real surprise there. We talked about it. Nick and I both had BC in this one. Quinnipiac and Wisconsin, Nick, going a bit of a different direction. So Quinnipiac 3-2 was the final in that one in overtime. Wisconsin, for having a month off, having a little bit of woes, and playing a Quinnipiac team that had only one falter down the stretch in their conference tournament, this was a great hockey game.
It was, and you could see some frustration from Quinnipiac throughout that game. I think Wisconsin, I not to speak for you, but they kind of surprised me a bit. Coming after the month off, it's almost, I got the sense, that the players were just happy to be in the tournament, and we're like, well, we're playing with house money, so what the heck, right? Yeah. And good for Wisconsin, right? Because I really thought that was going to be a little bit more leaning towards Quinnipiac, but they actually had a heck of a game. Again, wasn't that one? Was that single or was that double overtime? Or am I mixing that one up?
Single, I want to say.
That's single. Yeah. I mean, either way, Quinnipiac, they had to claw their way back into that game a little bit. And then you could see the wear down, especially in overtime. Quinnipiac started to tilt the ice in their favor, ended up getting the overtime winner. But again, a very good game, and one that I didn't think was going to be as close as it ended up being.
Yeah, first overtime, 4:04 into that overtime. The goal scorer's name, I'm not even going to begin to try to pronounce. I see at least 14 letters in that name and in the last name alone, so we're not...
Yeah, your limit's 13, so...
You knock off the one in front and you got it. Speaking of high-scoring games, the next one, BC 5-4 over Quinnipiac, Nick, in this Providence Regional, and... good for the Bobcats. You come back, you're the late game on that opening day, of course. You get that day of rest, so to speak, before you come back on that that Sunday game. But nonetheless, I mean, great hockey all around. This one, of course, in overtime as well. Jack Malone gets the game winner, 12:06 into this game. It was actually Quinnipiac who led 2-0 at one point before BC tied it up 2-2, and then they went back and forth. Besides the Michigan Tech game, which, not expected, great hockey once again.
And I think a lot of us, especially if you were bracket watching, right, were kind of clenching your fists a little bit with Quinnipiac. Yeah. Not that I didn't feel like Quinnipiac. I think they had a decent chance, and again, overtime, right? It's one shot away from sending a different team to St. Paul, but I really felt like they came out, they really grasped hold of that hockey game, BC, and this is where these top teams, especially this season, the talent that's on these squads that are in St. Paul, you could see that when you have sort of a game breaker type talent, that's what really pushed BC over the edge. They kind of were able to turn the tides per se. I mean, I think going back to Logan Cooley with against St. Cloud, right, to really make it a 2-goal game. I know it's not the best memory for Huskies hockey, but it's plays like that and players like that that can really make their quote unquote NIL money. We'll put it to that way. In the regional tournaments, and I really think that BC, again, after going down to nothing, took a deep breath, they reset, and then their playmakers carried the mail for them, and then they were able to take care of business in overtime. But Quinnipiac won a hell of a hockey game from that squad. That was a great game.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, the defending national champions now out of the tournament, the BC Eagles, on their way to St. Paul. Let's go on the other side of the bracket, actually opposite corner. The number 2 seed in the country, the Boston University Terriers, 6-3, the final over RIT, although at one point it was a 1-goal hockey game. About halfway through that hockey game, so good showing from the Tigers to at least have a little bit of pushback. I thought, you had a goal that was allowed that could have been almost offside for the Tigers that, gave the Terriers a bit of a scare. On the other side, Nick, Minnesota, very good game against Omaha. Omaha outshot heavily in period number 3. They carried a 2-1 lead at one point. The Gophers stormed back with 2 of their own, final in regulation. The Gophers get the job done in that first night. You had Omaha in this one. I'll be honest, Nick, until about the 10-minute mark of period number 3. And I guess a blown tire by an Omaha Maverick to change this hockey game. This one had everything we were hoping for.
It really did, and to me, Omaha was the better hockey team in this game. Yeah, they really were.
At least through the first 40 minutes, I thought the Gophers finally started to look like themselves late. But I mean, the Mavs, to put a showing like that against a team that has historically had your number at this time of year, pretty good.
Yeah, really good. And really for Minnesota, right, the 3 goals, all off of Omaha turnovers, right? So it wasn't that, when you say Minnesota looking like themselves, right, driving more possession, carrying in the puck with, shall we say, rush chances. But I really felt like Omaha really wasn't giving him much in the middle of the ice. And I think Minnesota struggled with that at times. And it really, as you mentioned, a blown tire and then just a broken play. And, again, we talk about talent and skill that can, be a difference maker in this time of the year. How about, was it Jackson Nelson, right, with the 2 goals?
Yeah. What a great tournament he had.
Yes, he did. And just unfortunate for Omaha, they just didn't have the answer, right? You could kind of get the sense, like you mentioned in the third, that, Minnesota was getting the momentum. And then again, when it became 3-2, to me, you could see a change in Omaha. And let's just say it was an uphill battle from there. But great, like you mentioned, great showing for Omaha. But the Gophers able to prevail on that matchup.
Speaking of uphill battles, Minnesota unfortunately didn't get any easier for them in the second night.
No.
And really a hockey game that, the score didn't really actually show what ended up being the case. 2 goals in the last 2 minutes for BU to steal this one. 6-3 was the final over the Gophers. The Terriers headed to St. Paul, both Boston squads and both number 1 seeds making the big dance. But yeah, 4-3. Lane Hudson ends up getting the game winner, actually 15:36 in a period number 2. And then nobody scores except for the late ones for BU to cap things off. Good showing from the Gophers. I thought they were a team that was a little bit higher than middle of the pack, so to speak, here in the Sioux Falls regional, coming in, from the Big Ten. I think it's about as good as you're going to get. BU was certainly the better team on paper. They showed it a little bit by being in command of this hockey game, but it was not an easy ride for the East Coast teams. Minnesota made things difficult.
They really did, and again, BU with all that talent up front. I mean, just disgusting, right? Oh my
gosh, yeah.
You could. I almost got the sense that towards the end of the second, I don't know if you felt the same way, Noah, that the Gophers almost seemed like they were running out of gas a little bit. And again, when BU plays with the pace that they do, and what the plays that they make, defending takes double the energy, right? And I just got the sense that Minnesota just, at times also got caught in kind of quick read a little bit. But that's what good talent will do. But I still feel like Minnesota didn't just roll over. I think they did what they had to do, especially through the middle, trying to slow them down a bit. But that BU team is just deep, man. That's a tough team. They're going to be a tough out here in St. Paul. But again, 6-3, like you mentioned, really probably 4-3, considering the two goals toward the end. But, a pretty heck of a good showing from the Gophers. Just came up short against one of the better teams in college hockey this year.
And how about the fact about the conversation of Jimmy Snuggerud returning for another year for the Gophers? That's huge for them.
I think what was more funny was that there was somebody that said that they're working to sign him, in 24 hours. And I'm not sure what source was there, because that turned out to be really not the case.
Yeah.
And speaking of which, how about, is it Will Moore that's coming over in the transfer portal? Yeah. Oh, no, not Will Moore. Sorry. Will Head, because it's Oliver Moore. What's the guy's name? The Gophers has got a really big transfer recruit.
Let's take a look here. I'll see if I can rustle up some information.
Yeah, rustle it up, because they with that top line next year with Oliver Moore, at least projected top line, right? Of Snuggerud, Oliver Moore, and is it? Oh, geez.
Yeah, great work as always from the Rink Live, by the way, our former colleague Sid Wolf. She's got her transfer portal sheet up and running. So again, something to kind of check out if you're interested in that sort of thing. As you'll hear from Brett Larson next week, there's a lot of movement that's going to be happening.
I'm trying to find where my phone is, because I had it in a group chat with some other folks, and I can't seem to find it.
Oh, no, you're good. Just trying to load things up here. We are looking at the Big Ten, Minnesota. Let's see. I don't have anybody that's been added for the Gophers right now on the list.
Here, I got it. Hold on. I've got it.
Charlie Strobel is headed out of Minnesota.
You mean out of Wisconsin, right?
Minnesota.
Oh, Charlie Strobel. I'm thinking of Charlie Stream. Sorry.
Yeah.
It is
Blake
Jim. It's Matthew Wood. Sorry, the national first round pick. Yep. Sorry.
Just randomly looking, Blake Biondi headed to Notre Dame, by the way, as well, too. That's a big pickup for the Fighting Irish, by the way.
Yep, and from what I understand, he's got some connections down in Notre Dame, and also aligning with some of his other personal type stuff. So it sounds like a pretty good fit for Blake Biondi, who's going to be a fifth year. Am I correct on that?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, fourth round draft pick of Montreal, but focused on the number 3 team here in the NCAA grouping in the Springfield Regional. Denver getting the job done. They're headed to St. Paul. A pair of 2-1 victories for them, both over UMass. That one was, I believe, our double overtime game. And
that
then
one sounds like double OT. Yep.
Yeah, and then Denver over Cornell in the second game as well. That one, of course, was in regulation. Sam Harris, his power play goal was the game winner against Cornell, who ended up beating Maine 3-1. I don't want to talk about it.
Right.
But yeah, DU for a team that we thought maybe might have a good look in this regional. They didn't make it easy, but they did what they had to do. They didn't falter at the right moments. I want to talk about the fact that, I'm going to be honest, Nick, I absolutely wrote UMass off early in this tournament.
You, me both.
What a great hockey game they played. Denver had no business winning that hockey game. They escaped that early game in that first game on Thursday. Great hockey from the UMass Minutemen, who really made a case to make a push into the next round.
And you know what UMass does really, really well is working pucks from below the goal line across the crease and really turning goaltenders and defensemen on like a swivel in terms of being able to pick up guys. The way that they run their offense is really tricky. It's not an offense that you see really in the NCHC. And it's one that, when going back to 2021, right, that's the same type of play that got the winner against overtime in Duluth. I should say against Duluth, not in Duluth. It was in Pittsburgh, Nick. You were there, so you should know, right? Then it was part of the forecheck, too, that St. Cloud was having a tough time, too, in the national championship game. But going back to the other side, right, for Denver, I don't know if it's more impressive, but Denver, again, who's won a national championship not that long ago, they just know how to be patient sometimes. And I feel like they did just enough to at least keep UMass from the danger areas as much as they could. Now, mind you, UMass, to me, I thought like you, I think they were actually the one that controlled most of that hockey game. But Denver survived. It was like a 2003 Minnesota Wild versus Colorado Avalanche, where you're getting heavily outshot, you're getting outchanced, and they just simply said, well, we're just going to stick to what we know we can do. And when we can be opportunistic, we'll do it that way. And they just simply, kind of like in a shootout, they outweighted their opponent, and it kind of worked at double overtime. And And I don't know, did you get the sense, Noah, that it wasn't that I don't think Denver won it per se in overtime? I just kind of felt like UMass was the first team that really lost a little bit of steam toward the end.
Well, it was just opportunistic play. The drama of having Matt Davis almost go down in that hockey game, a little bit of goaltending chaos on that penalty kill as well, too. You just felt like it's an odd scenario, but you felt like the more UMass let Denver hang around, which is kind of an inverse of what we expected that game to be, the more that you just knew that they were going to find a way. At some point, it was UMass's game to lose because they just couldn't find the back of the net. But a great showing for them. You asked me, what do the Minutemen do really well? I was going to say win national championships, but that's maybe a bit too on the nose.
Funny.
Anyway, congratulations to Denver, the only NCHC team still in the big dance at this point. But it wasn't for lack of trying, Nick. Let's go over to our last regional, which we'll talk about attendance in a second. But Maryland Heights here in Missouri, Western Michigan. Oh my gosh, did they shoot themselves in the foot? Up 4-2 in this hockey game. How about the Spartans' never say die attitude, at least in night number one? 5-4, they come back in overtime, just put a puck on net, ends up in the back of the net. This was great hockey. You thought that was good. How about Michigan punching back a pair of times, ultimately getting the better of North Dakota 4-3? No complaints here on our side of things. And then it was the Michigan Wolverines who ended up getting the job done in that last game, 5-2 over the number 4 team in the country. A bit of vindication from the Big Ten championship a week prior. And yeah, this one, of course, you added in a power play goal to kind of put salt in the wound. Michigan scores of 3 straight in period number 3 at the 12:42, 12:54 mark, and Dylan Duke adds his second of the period. He ended up getting the game winner in between Gavin Brindley's goal as well, too. And the Wolverines, surprising-ish that they get out of here, but really this regional could have had anybody in that group, I feel like.
Really. And it's weird because following Michigan this year, right? Good start. We expected that. They really struggled early in the Big Ten conference schedule. They really did. It just also seems like Michigan has kind of slowly crescendoed. And now, mind you, it hasn't been a perfect crescendo. They've had some ups and downs. They've been wildly inconsistent, to put it lightly.
Right.
But it seems like when the spotlight is the brightest, this is when this team usually likes to put it together. And so far, that's what they have done, and are off to St. Paul, as you mentioned, and part of the Final Four here that will be vying to raise the NCAA National Championship trophy here just about 6 days now. Yeah, geez.
Yeah, we'll talk about it in just a second. Before we get to our little brackets here very quickly, why is the NCAA shooting themselves in the foot and putting teams like that in the regional? And here's what I say for this. Teams are not predetermined, locations are. So you can't do anything about the teams that ended up in Missouri. From what I understand, though, is there not something in the bylaws or a preference for a seating place that has to be over 5,000? And that rink, of course, was well below that. And they also denied rinks close to 4,500 in this process as well, too. I guess my question is,
if you're not what I heard,
if you're the NCAA, is there not a precedent for finding that sweet spot? If I would say, Shields Arena in Fargo was a great example, great atmosphere last year, anywhere between 4,500 to 7,500.
Yeah, but so here's the issue, right? And that is, we talked about this, Nate Wells, the Gopher State, with their Big Ten crew, and that is, there is a limit. And when I say limit, there is not a ton of arenas in the West per se that are actually placing bids to host the regionals, right? Missouri, Springfield, right? They're kind of on a new wave of hockey, right? Again, Lindenwood, coming into the fold, they will be in the third year.
Maryland Heights, sorry,
Maryland Heights, Springfield, but my age is showing anyway. So at the end of it, Noah, it seems like there's two problems here, and that is you're not getting the bids that you probably need/want, and you're getting excitement from non-traditional markets. Mind you, St. Louis is hosting the Frozen Four next year, right? Yeah. And it just kind of goes to the same point we've been making all season, and something that a a lot of our guests have echoed too. It needs to go back to home sites where you have that already, right? You have the attendance, capabilities. You also have television capabilities at every single one of these arenas. Again, I know there's some logistical things that probably have to get figured out, but also you would think that by having them on campus sites, I mean, you talk about not just the numbers, but also what about, pardon me, there goes my voice again. Hold on. You would think that, how do I want to phrase this? I think really what it comes down to, Noah, is there is no sweet spot, because the NCAA really is shooting from the hip right now. I don't think they really know what they're doing.
Yeah.
They're just doing it because that's what they have to do right now. And when Maryland Heights and Sioux Falls, they were good regionals, don't get me wrong. They were good hosts, but again, we saw issues with ticket numbers and ticket sales, and $1,000 a ticket. And then the building was, but then the building was 3/4 empty. So it's like, I don't think you're going to get those same problems if it goes back to campus sites. And plus, wouldn't there be more revenue shared amongst the participating schools, which is kind of what you want to do? I don't know. I don't know. Like, that's my take on it. I'm curious to know what you saw.
It's just a whole interesting piece all around. The logistical challenge moving forward is, if it is campus sites, you have to have another weekend or two that you tell those buildings to stay open, just to mark it off in their calendars, depending on how their teams go. The flip side is you're going to start seeing places like Ed Robeson Arena, which is a great hockey rink, but only seats about 3,600, vying for a potential bid as well too. I'll be honest, my favorite highlight of all the arena shenanigans that I saw a fair amount of UND Fighting Hawks and Fighting Sioux uniforms in the Sioux Falls regional, and I just thought that was humorous because they weren't playing anywhere near there. I thought that was pretty good, and I thought that was very fitting for the fan base intellectually. Anyway, moving on to our last topic here. Before we preview the Frozen Four, let's take a look at our bracket challenge here, Nick. You might actually win something here before the Huskies Warming House podcast.
I know, right? How about that?
How about this? Your second round certainly saved you. I am not doing as well as I did last year. My second round certainly hurt me. Let's take a look at the grouping here. First round, like I said, I went 7 for 8, so 1 point apiece, 7 points there. Nick, 5 for 8, if my math serves me correct.
That sounds right.
Second round, you hit all but one. The only one you actually did miss was the aforementioned Maryland Heights Regional. You had North Dakota in that grouping.
I did.
I only was able to get one correct, and that was actually BC. I had Minnesota in, I had Michigan State in, and I had Maine in. So whoops on that one. So you talk about the bracket challenges. Your first round is nice, but you got to have let's say at least 2 teams coming out of your brackets into the Frozen Four. So theoretically, we're both at 8 points right now. 4 points still on the board. Technically, you can grab all 4. You need either BC or DU to make the championship game. Either one of those works for your scenario, or you need to get the score correct. You said 6 goals in the national championship game. The only possible point I can grab is just the score in the national championship game only. So really, pretty much a lot of possibility here for you, to be honest with you. If you can crown your national champion, if it's BC and DU playing in the championship game and you got the score correct, you can get a maximum of 12 points. I can only get one more, maximum of 9. So looking pretty good in your neck of the woods, Nick, all things considered. So maybe early congratulations, unless things get a little chaotic. So
let's not
put the cart before the horse. Yeah.
Or as Noah Grantless is saying, the fat lady, it's what's you said this on the Toros broadcast or something like, over to the fat lady sings and I haven't warmed up my vocal cords or something like that. Yeah,
pretty much. We're just glad we have vocal cords on this show, but it's going to be an interesting one. Let's talk about the Frozen Four here very quickly before we send it over to our friend Ben Holden. Nick, let's take a look at the last graphic we have for the day. Let's look at the Frozen Four. Boston College playing Michigan here on the one side of the bracket. They will have the late night game, and the number 2 and number 3 teams in the country play the 4 o'clock game. Those are all Central Time, so 4 and 7:30. Let's start with the early game on the right side of the bracket here. Number 2 and number 3, BU and Denver. Nick, who comes out of this one?
Did we not predict this?
Well, you kind of did. My teams are not here, so
right. So I thought Denver was coming out of this, right?
Yep. No, you had Denver. You know what, Nick? It's hard to argue against that BU team. I think they've got too much.
I'm scared. I'm scared about that. That BU team is talented, and let's just say that Denver, although that they're here, they didn't get here in the way that I thought they would.
Yeah. It's
so that's a little bit nerve-wracking on my end.
It's very much going to depend on goaltending and war of attrition, I think, in that one. Can Denver outlast BU and play the right way and really slow down that high-flying offense? On the other side, both of our picks did not make it in the bottom half. Michigan replaces that. Both of our picks in the top half was there. BC, you had BC, so I'm assuming you're sticking with them.
Yeah, I'm sticking with that.
I'm going to go with you. I think BC is going to be there as well. I've got BC, BU. I think the Terriers upset the Eagles to crown a national championship. 7 goals, of course, that I picked in the championship game. You've got 6 goals on the docket. Can Denver solve BC? Are you sticking with your guns and saying the Eagles win, or are you flipping the script here?
No, I think the Eagles, if Denver does make it, I think the Eagles do come out and raise a national championship in St. Paul. So
yeah,
I don't know. Denver's, and that's the thing, Denver's sneaky because they've won games in different ways. And I think that's why you can't count them out. I go back to 2022, right? When they were not the better team through 50 minutes of that hockey game against Minnesota State. And then they start to get a little bit of a shall we say, a creak in the door, and then all of a sudden they get one and they bust it wide open. So it's one of those where Denver has, if they can keep it tight, they're comfortable on that role. They've won 2 recently that were very tight. And so that's sort of the one thing, is that if they can slow it down, they could do it. But I just don't know of how good both BU and BC are if they get to play the Eagles of Boston College. That's going to be 2 really tough games to be able to do that. They can. It's just going to take a monumental effort on both nights to be able to do it.
Yeah, very interesting. Denver, of course, only 4 goals compared to 12 when they play BU, and of course they've only given up 2 compared to 6 as far as the Terriers are concerned. So a lot of interesting matchups, even on that first day, of course, national championship game, 7:30. On that Saturday, April 13th is the date. First games, of course, coming on Thursday, April 11th. We'll send it over to our friend Ben Holden to talk a little bit about college hockey, about our show, as we cap off episode 206.
Another guest here with us on our final episode here on Huskies Warming House podcast, Nick Maxon, the original host, Noah Grant, with us as well, who took over that role. And then, how about this? One of our additional co-hosts that we've had after the pod here, it's Ben Holden. Ben, welcome back, my friend.
What's up, boys? Good to see you guys, and looking forward to having some fun here. And I'm sure we'll go down memory lane a little bit, and who knows what we'll talk about. But it's a pleasure to be with you guys. And I was joking with both of you before we started. I said I'll probably get a little sappy with you at some point. So, I'm a guy that I've tried my whole life to never forget where I've come from or people that have helped me. The old adage of, when you're at your lowest point, you find out who your friends are. And, a little over 3 years ago, when my life changed after all the years I spent at CBS, you guys welcomed me in, and hence the name, the Huskies Warming House, right? And, that still means a lot to me, guys. And because I had so much uncertainty at that point, and I was always very appreciative of that. I still am, and I'll always cherish the time. So let's get the sap out of the way now, man, and and we can have some fun. But I mean that with all sincerity to both you guys. It was a lot of fun, and it was a great help to me at a really tough time in my life. So love you both as friends for that. Thanks.
Love you too, Benny. And honestly, us helping you, we figured you were helping us.
Oh yeah, God. I remember that. We shit bricks and we're like, Ben Holden wants to come on our show.
I did, man. Good to see both of you guys, man. So
yeah, it's been fun, man. So can't believe it's been 4.5 years. No, I really can't. It's just nuts.
Yeah, no, I can't believe it's been 4.5 years either. And I think the thing that's really interesting, at least on my side of things, I was telling Ben pre-show that my dad just loves every time you've got a broadcast, especially in the college hockey world, because he follows some team named the Gophers. That's all right, I guess, apparently. So,
yep.
But although they're not that all right this year from what I've seen. But with that being said, he texted me and he goes, well, who are you going to have on for your guys' final show? And I was like, well, Bill Prout, Ben, and, Brett Larson. And he goes, oh, yeah, I remember, Ben. It's the only time I've listened to all of your episodes every week. I'm like, sweet, dude.
I was a time slot hit, to quote Seinfeld, man. I was a time slot hit.
Hey, you want to talk about a hit, though, Ben? How about this? Going back 3 years ago to now, how good are your freaking Red Wings looking in the upcoming years, by the way?
Well, yeah, I'm optimistic, but in March I wasn't very optimistic. They kind of hit the skids, but I think with them getting Patrick Kane, and it looks like that's all going to work out. It looks like he's healthy. It's obviously having Patrick Kane in your team's never a bad thing when he's healthy. And I think, too, what that does is it's going to allow the Red Wings over the next, hopefully, 3 years to be able to attract other guys. I mean, the last time I remember the Wings being in any conversation for any big-name free agent was back when Parise and Suter were on the market. And that was like 10 years ago, I want to say. So,
hey, where did they go, Ben? Any idea?
Yeah, they went to the state of hockey. I understand. But,
they still technically are on the books, so that gives you any sentiment.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, I think it's, I trust Steve Yzerman as Red Wing fans here in the state of Michigan. Gordie Howe, some will say he's the greatest wing. And Steve Yzerman, to me, I grew up with him, and we all idolized him as kids playing in high school. I'm dating myself, but that's okay. It is what it is. And, I trust him. Look what he did in Tampa. I mean, it's a similar blueprint. It's pretty much the same blueprint here, Noah, to your point. So I'm optimistic, and hopefully we can hoist the cup here in the next few years.
Wait, did he say the biggest wing or the biggest wang, Ben?
Well, you guys are the biggest wangs, but I said wing. Nice, Noah. Very nice.
It is that blueprint, though, right, Ben, for the Red Wings. And speaking of blueprint for the Red Wings, I had the chance to go to one of the last games at Joe Louis Arena, and it was Andreas Athanasiou that scored the overtime winner against Devin Dubnyk. I remember going out to a bar in Detroit after the game, and the hockey folks in Detroit are fantastic. It was great to chat with them post game. And the best thing was, Detroit was well out of a playoff spot, unfortunately. The Wild were, I think, in a wild card and maybe third in the Central. And a couple of Wings fans said, hey, man, nice game. That was a good overtime win. But do us a favor. Can you please kick the shit out of Colorado for us when you get there?
Yep.
Just the hatred for the Avalanche is still shared amongst both our fan bases.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, when they played him early in March, and I think I still call it Twitter. I refuse to call it X. And I don't tweet a lot about live game stuff. I just don't. It's just not my style. But that night I did. I was fired up, and my comment was something to the effect of, it's obviously not what it was. This is a measuring stick for Detroit now, because
yep.
I mean, Colorado is obviously a favorite. I think when that squad's healthy, I think they are the best team in the West. Vancouver might argue that. Edmonton might argue that. There's some other teams that maybe in Dallas. I mean, a lot of people forget about Dallas, but they just go about their business, man. That's a good team. Mm-hmm. And so I personally never had a problem with anybody on that team except Claude Lemieux. He's the one athlete. It's kind of like, it's like the night that Kane went back to Chicago, guys, and Shelley was like, don't steal my thunder. Well, guess what? He stole his thunder. And that was a moment we haven't had the chance to enjoy as Red Wing fans in a long time. But my point is, Chris Chelios always said, "Oh, I'll never go to Detroit. I'll never play there." Well, he won a couple cups here, and all that. But the one player you could honestly say would never ever play in Detroit was Claude Lemieux. No chance. So I didn't have a problem with anybody else. And then you guys know this, but for a couple of years, I worked for Lake Erie in the American League, and we were Colorado's farm team. I remember the first summer I came home and I was wearing Avs stuff. They're like, dude, what is wrong with you? And I'm like, I go, well, number one, it was free from the team. Number two, I worked for their organization. So that was a simple answer for me.
Well, speaking of a couple of years ago, Ben, obviously working for different organizations, you mentioned kind of the tail end of the CBS time.
Yeah.
I believe late February, Denver's the opponent. Inadvertently, your last Huskies game that we've seen you in that realm.
Yeah, that was crazy stuff, man. It was literally the week before COVID, and it ended up being my last hockey game I did at CBS. It was Denver at St. Cloud, and it was the 29th of February of 2020. I got hurt on a plane the year prior to that, and was still dealing with some issues in my neck and concussion issues, and I didn't travel the next week. The last game was going to be Denver. I believe it was at Denver with CC in the Gold Pan. Mm-hmm. And I called him on Monday and just said, I can't travel, man. I was having a hard time traveling there for probably a good 6 months. And I did it, but I just sucked it up. And yeah, that ended up being my last game there hockey wise. So, you know, I had a lot of good memories at St. Cloud. I mean, so many great people there. And, you know, it's been one of the guys that I've really enjoyed. Well, two guys that I've really enjoyed to follow. Robbie Jackson, our boy, and love Robbie. He's one of the best dudes I've ever met. And I didn't know him a ton, and I didn't deal with him a ton, but I always respected the hell out of the way he played and the way he's playing now. And that's Nick Perbix. I mean, I think that dude has just what a career he's going to have. And, you know, made the Olympic team, and Lars was there with Quinny, and you guys know my friendship, my relationship with Quinny, and he was our coach in Lake Erie. And, you know, it's cool to see that. You know, Robbie, I follow him on Instagram, and he just looks like he's loving life, man. He's playing overseas. And, you know, I stay in touch with his dad on Facebook mainly, and see Robbie on Insta. And, you know, we message. And, you know, one of my highlights in all the years I came to St. Cloud was when he had me on his show. That was cool stuff, man. I love that. And, you know, what a great dude and what great family. And again, with Perbix, I've enjoyed seeing him. And, you know, I got to give a shout out too to Ryan Paling. I mean, you know, again, like Nick, I didn't really know him. Like you guys know my friendship and my relationship with Robbie. It was pretty unique. And, you know, I've been doing a little writing here on the side for an outfit I work for in Detroit, which has been great. I enjoy it. And I actually may still do it on Paling. Like, here's a guy that goes in the first round, and it looked like his career was in the skids. Yeah. And he is, man, John Tortorella, and you got to give Ryan credit. He's resurrected his career. Not that it was terrible, but for a first round pick, it wasn't looking real good. And so he's another guy I like to follow, and always enjoyed the few times I got to chat with him too.
Yeah, and somebody by the name of Dave Starman had a good input on the draft floor that day. Let's not forget that.
Yeah, you guys remember that story?
I do remember that story.
Oh, that's a beauty. I'm like, I think was Paling, like, I want to say he was like 20th somewhere in the 20s, early 20s. Noah, do you know offhand, or either one of you guys?
I think that's 19, I think, is where he ended up going, if I remember right.
Yeah,
I think you're right. And I like the pick before went, and Montreal's on the clock. And I texted Starman. I go, you guys are taking Paling. I'm betting a house on it. Crickets. No reply. Like 2 minutes after they picked Paling, he texted me. So that was another legendary story there. So yeah, I'm happy for Ryan, you know, and like I said, I'm happy for Perby. And, you know, I have a little bit of communication again with him on Instagram, and just, you know, hey, nice play or whatever. And Robbie a little bit more, because I had a better friendship with Robbie and just was closer. It wasn't that we didn't get along. It was just I was closer with Robbie. And, you know, Jack Kashan's another guy, you know, that I like watching Jack, and I'm surprised he hasn't gotten that shot yet, but I know him. He's probably never going to quit. So I pull for him too.
It's funny that you mentioned coaches like John Tortorella. I think one of our favorite guests we had on, Noah, was Nick Dowd, and he talked about you know, being coached by Daryl Sutter. And I think one of my favorite stories that he talked about was it was a shift that they weren't in their coverage. You know, it was kind of as I think he said, Noah, it was like kind of like a lazy coverage kind of play. Like he knew that they weren't probably in the right spot. They get to the intermission, and Daryl Sutter, in probably the most Daryl Sutterism way, said something to the tune, and I don't know if this is a direct quote or not, but paraphrasing, said something to the tune of, you know, we're just not going to play defense tonight. You know, just going to let guys go in front of the net and, you know, be uncontested, score against some goals of us, and, you know, something like that. And just, it's like, yeah, that sounds like Daryl Sutter. But Nick Dowd, you know, reminiscing about that, was like, you know what, he was 100% right. And he was kind of like that father figure. You know, I know that Daryl Sutter sometimes gets some bad flack out there in the media, but it sounds like behind closed doors, like he just had a way of communicating, like, hey, I need you to be better, right? But this is the way I'm going to do it, right? And I think Tortorella too has that aura too. There's a lot that we see that is out there, and just maybe just the emotion side of things. When really, you put these guys behind closed doors. I mean, they're some of the most genuine, arms open kind of guys you can ever meet, right?
Yeah, it's funny. So something else popped into my head, but first I kind of piggyback off you, Nick. So throughout the last couple of winters, one of the many entities that I'm working for now is a high school, a group that does a lot of high school stuff. And it's high end stuff. And, like they tried to get me like 3 years ago, the year I was in DC. And I'm like, dude, I'm doing 100 games in the KHL. I'm doing that year I did like 20 Big Ten games. I go, I can't do it, man. And I was coming back here because my girlfriend stayed here. And it was great because I got to come back and do a ton of Michigan and Michigan State games and see her. And anyway, so the program that we do a lot of games with here in the Metro Detroit area, it's a private school called Orchard Lake St. Mary's. And Freddie Pletch, my partner for the last 4 years on BTN, and longtime friend. Freddie and I have known each other for 20 years since I've been in college hockey, and he's been in it longer. And he is an encyclopedia, man. Like I called him today and I was like, hey, I want to double check this. I want to just historical stuff with Michigan State. And so the point is, like, he is such a research extraordinaire. And so he filled in for one of those high school games for me because I was anchoring at Sports News Highlights that night and couldn't do it. And so we talked the next day and he goes, hey, I didn't know Clano played for Torts. He's the head coach at St. Mary's. And I was like, how did you find that out? And he goes, I hockey DB'd him and I clicked on his name and it took me to the team. It was like some East Coast, now defunct league in like Roanoke, Virginia. And that Clano played for him. Brian Clano's the coach. He's been there for 25 years. And man, he had some stories. And, the one that stuck with me was last time I did one of their games, I brought it up and he's like, yeah, I went into the office and saw where I was on the board and, he had me at wing and I'd always been a center. So I kind of went up and said, hey, coach, how come you got me at center? And he goes, well, I'm going to cut you in 2 days anyway. So what's the difference? He didn't cut him. He was screwing with him.
Yeah.
And so it's just cool shit like that. So, but yeah, the other thing that popped into my head too, you mentioned Dowd and, I'm always going to be tied to it because my voice is on it, and I'm proud of that. It was the first time St. Cloud went to the Frozen Four, man, and that was my first experience with St. Cloud State Husky hockey, and some amazing guys on that team. I did vote for Drew LeBlanc for the Hobie that year, by the way. He deserved it. He went through hell, and he was committed to the program, and I'm happy to say that year I got the winner. The other years that I voted, I didn't get it, but I voted for who I felt was right, and I clearly felt Drew was that year.
Well, bad news for you, Ben. You've been on the intro to our show for about 2.5 years now. So
on the Turbix goal?
Yeah.
Oh, I love that call too, man. That was, I think, I can't remember who it was, man. I'm glad you brought the pod up because Schloss and Jake Brandt texted me a few weeks ago. They were in Omaha, and Jordan McAlpine was there, and I got to know Jordan. He was the first dude I walked by every time I got off the elevator there to go up to the booth. And yeah, man, I can't remember who it was, but I think it was Perbix. It was like a 75-foot stretch pass.
It was the second game of the pod. The Huskies were struggling that game against CC, Nick, that we always talk about. And the Huskies clawed back from a 3-0 deficit, and he unleashed a bomb from the point to tie it up, posting in with like a minute and a half left. And that was the call. And talking about that, always one of my favorite calls, would definitely agree. Random thought about Tortorella, by the way. I actually work with a gal right now who used to be a flight attendant for the Tampa Bay Lightning way back in the day. She's a nurse right now.
But she's got stories.
Yeah, and said a lot of stuff I can't say because she's still actually under an NDA until 2029. But one thing I can mention that she did.
That's heavy.
She did say is John Tortorella does not like airplanes. Like had to get like therapy and has to take a bunch of stuff to get on airplanes, or at least it used to be back in the early 2000s. But
he's a John Madden type. He's just gonna bust it around, right?
No control, man. Like, I'll tell you what, guys, you guys know how much I flew over the years, and watching these things on the news, man, wheels falling off, planes. I'm glad I may have to fly here soon for one gig, but for the most part, I'm driving. I'm glad I'm not living that life anymore, because it ain't fun when you do it 10 months out of the year after year. It's a grind. So I get that. No, I do.
Hey, you talk about family, though. You talk about the pod. Of course, you walk through the pod. First of all, kind of want to hear a little bit more about that looking back. But then you kind of join us and you kind of become even more ingrained into that St. Cloud family. Going through the subsequent years that we've had our show, I mean, what has it kind of been to go through the pod, join us, and then just, be a part of Huskies hockey forever? Because I think you're always going to be linked to us.
That means a lot, man. You're going to make me cry. Yeah, I mean, it's cool. Like I said, that's why that when Nick mentioned Dowd, and Ryan Farragher, I believe, was the goalie on that team. And, all the young dudes that came up, and Callie Kosla. I mean, how did I forget Callie? I apologize, Callie. I reconnected with him in the KHL in 21 and 22, the year I worked it. He was unbelievable, man. And, I'm probably missing guys, but Joey Ballgame was on that team. That was kind of where that all started. Nicknaming Joey and Joey Bennick. And, just the thing that I always loved about St. Cloud when I did their games, and I actually said this to my girlfriend, Owens. You guys know I call her Owens. Her name's Michelle, but it's a hockey thing. I never call her Michelle. It's always Owens. And we were talking and, just about the Big Ten and working, doing their games. And it's, again, it's been great with travel and, that's been easier. And, let's be honest. I mean, they're bigger brand name schools, but this is the point I made to Owens. I said, the thing that I loved about that conference, one of the many things, were number one, the people, the players, guys we're talking about now, guys like you, fans I've met and interacted with, but every single school in that conference is a hockey school. That's the number one sport at those schools. And that was something I loved. And, St. Cloud, that's, clearly the case there too, the men's and the women's program. So, those kind of things mean a lot to me. You guys have gotten to know me and, most people, see me do my thing and, oh, this guy seems cool. And, they don't know anything about me. But I care and I care, and relationships have always been important to me. And, the guys we're talking about and, players that played there, over a decade ago, and you still follow them and keep in touch. And you always have those memories, and whether it was one goal pinging off the pipe or a stretch pass or a big hit or the puck did go off Perbix's skate against Duluth. Don't tell Sandelin, but, stuff like that, and those are things I'll cherish the rest of my life. And, I had a friend years ago, to your point, Noah, about being tied to St. Cloud the way I am and the small way I am. I had a friend that said years ago to me, like 15 years ago, and she said, you realize every time you do a game, you're with somebody for the rest of their life. And I was like, wow, that's pretty heavy, and so, but as a broadcaster, you never think about that. You just want to get the names right. You want to call the best game you can call. You want to be informative. You want to entertain. You want to educate. But that stuff it means so much to me, guys. And, I'll always cherish that. So yeah. Nick, I thought we were done with the snap.
Nick, I don't know if you want to kind of touch a little bit on how we talked to Ben. I remember when you guys were doing the pod, though, we had some statistic or something that we figured out about Vietti Miettinen. And, of course, we're watching the games. And one of my first cool moments, not actually having met you, Ben, is I think I tweeted something in the middle of the intermission. You mentioned a comment about it was Vietti Miettinen's freshman year, and I was like, oh, well, he's got such and such stat line going on or whatever, and I'm watching the game, and like 10 seconds later, it's like, yeah, and Vietti Miettinen, he's got this much or whatever, and I'm just like, holy shit, like this dude just said what I tweeted.
Right.
Nick, how did that all kind of transpire us into having this guy that we're tweeting at on our show like 2 months later?
Oh, geez, where to begin?
Don't get snappy, Nick.
I know. Well, it's interesting, right? Because when I was at school, right? Thank gosh to our heavy producer there at HP who got me into contact with you, and I got to spend a day with you, Benny, and that was still to me the highlight of my college career, has been able to spend some time with you, Carlos and Dave, and kind of really get intimate with, how CBS does their thing. I mean, it was good, right? It's a high level production, and not that, what Brian Stanley and HP do isn't, right? It's still really good for college, but to see that, done at the next level, is just, when you're so immersed in it, it's just insane, right? And being able to pick your brain. And then, Noah, if I remember correctly, and I may have to throw this back at you, But it kind of started there because I know you and me and Ben and I, we kind of connected from there. And, you've always been a good support, avenue for me, Ben. I really, really appreciate that. There's not enough words that I can throw at that I can really say. I'm running out of words already.
Well, I'm trying to remember, and maybe Ben, you remember. It's been so long in our ancient wisdom here. How did we, or lack thereof, how did we really end up connecting beyond? Because I remember when, of course, you and Nick, you went and met Ben and Dave when they were, of course, at the Herb Brooks National Hockey Center. And I remember thinking, I don't know who this Ben guy is. He's a former military guy or loves military whatever, because, of course, you talk in football games all the time. And then I remember, who's this Dave Starman guy whose nose enters the room about 2 minutes before he does? But anyhow, I digress. Ben, it's like, when did we transition into more of just casual conversation into like, hey, I'm thinking about moving away from this avenue and you guys might be a good fit here?
I think I just think we probably messaged on, again, it was Twitter then, so I'm going to call it Twitter. Yeah. I refuse to call it X, but I think it was just through that. No, I think, and you guys said, hey, and I think it was something like, hey, if you guys, need any help or whatever, or, and I think that spawned into, hey, you want to come on the show? And I was like, yeah. And like, you guys were, I do remember this. You guys were the first. I talked to Schloss, and Schloss did a story and put it out there. And I mean, most people connected the dots, man. They're like, he went in the pod, they got pissed, and they weren't going to use him anymore. That's true, but there were a lot of other layers to it. I was promised a contract, and my pay was cut in half. My insurance was cut. And I'm like, well, I can't keep living on what I might get because of COVID. And I did that pod, guys, because I knew that it was going to be almost 3.5 weeks of work in one place. I didn't have to travel. I didn't have to test. It was once a week. I didn't have to go in 4 days to do a game. And that was ultimately why I did it. And I wanted to get back to hockey because things had run their course there because of the things I listed, all the things that happened. And I was there 12 years full time, man. And, and I think that comes to mind, Noah, to your question. And I felt like I needed to kind of get it off my side of the street, man, no matter how big or small the audience was. And I trusted you guys. And obviously, nothing came from it. Yeah, I heard a few things here and there, not from that, but from other things along the way. But that's just life. And that's really where my gratitude comes to you guys, man. Like I was saying in the beginning, because that's a moment in my life I'll never forget. Again, pings went off the pipe, stretch pass. I remember stuff like that. Yeah. And it's the little stuff, man. It's not the big picture. It's the little stuff that you remember that really gets you in the heart, right? And really gets your soul, and you remember, and you're grateful to people, and you appreciate it. So I think that was kind of the long answer, Noah, to your question. I think that's, if I remember right, that's how it went.
Yeah. And
damn it felt good when you guys let me talk and to do that the first time. Now I'm way more comfortable with it. Again, people figured it out, but that's business, and it is what it is, man. So I loved doing that conference. I loved going to St. Cloud. I always enjoyed it. The people were awesome, and it was just a ton of fun. And, you mentioned Brian Stanley. I got to know Brian real well because his SAT company they provided then, they probably still do, most of the games I did at CBS, whether it was football, basketball, hockey, lacrosse, whatever the hell I was doing. And Brian's a good man. So, Brian was one of those people that, like you guys, reached out right away, like, holy mackerel, what happened, dude? And just again, that stuff means the world to me, guys.
Yeah, and I remember that conversation too divulged into, we started talking after the show, and it was, you were kind of like, I don't really know what I'm going to do right now. And we're like, well, we have an opening for someone of your particular talent. But what's interesting, I was trying to look back. I did the same thing with Bill Prout. If my math is right, do you remember the last episode number, or around the last episode number that you were on in show history? Just general.
Do you know?
I believe. I think I know.
Don't tell me. Tell me. I'll try and guess. I just want to know if you know. I think I did the show. Didn't I do the show through like the Frozen Four with you guys that year? And then I started to get busy and stuff. And so I'm going to guess. So how many episodes?
Okay, so we've done officially in terms of week to week, we've done over 200. We're probably at 250 total.
Man,
so you're going.
That's a lot of work, boys.
You're going back a little bit.
All right. So that was your second year of it in 21 when I jumped in January of 21?
Yeah.
Yep.
So when did you start it in 20? What month? Right at hockey season?
February.
February, yeah.
So I'm going to say, February of 20. Okay, so you went through February of 20 all the way through the summer and into the 2021 season then.
Correct. And you were with us until the tail end of that pod season, the 2021. So
oh man, I'm going to say it's got to be like 85.
I believe it's 126 if I remember
right. Wow, I was way off.
Yeah, maybe it could have been we had you on maybe later again, maybe in the following season, but I think that's the last time that we've had you on the show. But yeah, I guess I wouldn't know, and I sure as hell know my dad doesn't know because.
Tell you what's your dad's name?
Todd.
I forget. Sorry,
Todd.
Yeah. Todd, appreciate the love, man. Thank you.
Yeah, every time. I'll be working. I'll be at the hospital slanging around some Vicodin, and all of a sudden I'll get a text at 7:30 at night. Ben Holden doing Big Ten game. Great, Dad. I hope you enjoyed the game.
Right.
But going into you did some CCHA work this year, Ben. With the transition and stuff, it feels good to be back in your element, right? And I think if there's anything, we talked about perseverance with Bill Prout. And I think there's definitely were times between me and Noah and, just everything that we've been doing is, what's the next step? What's that road like? And it's not that we really had a clear roadmap, Noah. I think we just kind of was really by the seat of our pants.
Still is.
But right. But really, it like you said, it was an outlet for us to talk about the game and to, mention the relationships. But, in terms of your career, kind of getting back on your feet after all these things, how's it felt to be, kind of back in your element, calling college hockey? And even though, conference is different, there's still a lot of the same people that are around the game.
Yeah. It feels great. It was the first year was tough. And, as hard as that was, guys, then I got the job in DC at RT America doing the KHL. And it took me at CBS. It was like steps, like the first time Big Ten said, we're going to use you. And I remember the great Frank Mazzocco, who I absolutely love. Frank. He was one of my heroes. He was the guy that I looked up to in college hockey because I was fortunate to have Dave Strader when he was here with the Red Wings when I was early in my career, and Dave mentored me a lot. And I wasn't doing a ton of play-by-play then. I was doing high school stuff in the late 90s, early 2000s because I had a full-time job. And I remember Frank, when I put out a thing like, hey, I'm back in the college hockey world. I'm doing Ohio State at Michigan State. Go figure. Now I'm doing them 4 years later to go to the Big Ten final, which is cool. Again, I like that poetic and, it's kind of like Moneyball, who says, hockey isn't romantic, right? Mm-hmm. And Frank tweeted, "The Phoenix is rising." When I put that, and that meant so much to me coming from that dude. And we've had some great conversations, doing the Big Ten. And there was a night in Columbus back in December, and him and Wally and I didn't say a word. I didn't say more than 20 words really for like an hour. And it was those two telling stories. And I was like, Frank, you got to bring back College Hockey USA, man. We watched that in Traverse City, Michigan, my team for 2 years, 87, 88. And it was just awesome, but it's good, Nick, and I'm doing more now than I have and really since the job in DC. And I was kind of going down that road. That was, I don't want to say it was harder to go through that, a year and a half later, because I was living the dream, man. I was making more money than I've ever made at 28 years in at that point. I walked 4 minutes to work. I called hockey every day. I was all over the globe. There were people watching us all over the place. We had a huge following in Europe with that league. And that was hard. That was almost harder than CBS because I did 100 games, literally, and even 100 games that regular season, did one playoff game, and the network was shut down because Putin invaded Ukraine and people dropped RT and they were afraid they were never going to get viewership back. And, you know, I never thought I'd lose a job because of a war, but I did. And my girlfriend, she's out in the living room. She'll tell you, I was not a happy camper for a while. That was a real kick in the you-know-whats, man. And because at CBS, I was able to bounce back pretty quick. Within 2 weeks, I had work, you know, and so that was tough. But, you know, being back, man, I just love being in the rink, man. You know, you guys know how it is. You know, I get to go up to Munn on Saturday, and, you know, it's going to be a magnificent crowd, one of their biggest crowds they've ever had. And you know, being around Freddie, and I've been around Paul Caponigri, Cappy quite a bit. We talk all the time, and, you know, we knew each other, but we were at different, you know, entities all the years I was at CBS. And Cappy's a good dude, man. He's a good friend, you know, and Freddie likewise. And, you know, I've gotten to know Pat Micheletti quite a bit. Pat and I are, you know, Pat's a good friend. He would do anything for me and I'd do anything for him. So I guess I've opened it a little more, you know. And there was a trip I had in February. I was driving to Chicago, and, you know, I talked to like 6 people in hockey that day. And I was like, wow, I got into bed and I was like, that was a hell of a day. I didn't even call a game, you know, just talking to all the people that, you know, Dave Shireen, Carlos and Cappy and Mick and Freddie and Jake Brandt called me and we talked, and, you know, just it's family. You guys know that. You've been in the sport a long time, your whole lives, and in different ways you're around it. And so it's strengthened me in that way, Nick. And it's also, as I've just mentioned, it's brought a lot of people into my life, not just in hockey, but as friends too. So it's been awesome, man. It was tough. Those couple years were tough. They were the 2 hardest years I had in 30 years of doing this. And, you know, I was born and raised to not quit, and you fight and you just keep going, and one day it'll be over, but I ain't ready for it to be over yet, boys.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the names, too, that you mentioned, former podcast guests on this show, by the way.
There you
too.
go.
So you talk about, you know, the family that is. My final question for you, let's talk about arguably the toughest day of your career, though. I'll throw myself under the bus. Particular day of the old Huskies Warming House podcast, though, where...
oh, boy.
Yeah, it was... we ended up doing a show, and I'm trying to remember, we ended up doing some sort of outro thing, and we finished the outro... and we didn't end up recording it. So we had already signed off for the night. Well,
it was you.
Well,
you're the one who had the red button, my friend.
Our particular corporate entities mismanaged the situation. We'll talk to HR, but it was very much, I had to call a Ben Holden back that was not too happy, and then in my infinite wisdom decided to send him a professional email about how not happy I was in that situation. So the bridge didn't burn, but it certainly had a candle lit for a second, and
it was cinched.
Ben, how difficult was that day, and have you recovered from your losses?
It wasn't that bad, and yes, I recovered relatively quickly. Have you recovered from yours?
You know what? It weighed on me for a while, because I think if there's any trend that we've talked about in this show, it's certainly things that I've definitely screwed up, and then Nick has to pick up the pieces for me on the flip side. So
he's a fixer.
It certainly is. Yeah. But I certainly do miss. Of course, when we did the show, we used to talk. We talked a little bit of gambling every day, and pretty much texted almost daily and stuff. And those are things that really stick with me. Is kind of a simpler time where, you know, there are moments in your life where you think, oh, I'm never going to get out of this situation. I'm never going to figure this out. And I always love the quote, "You've made it through 100% of your bad days." And it sounds cheesy as shit, but it's totally true. And you think back to those moments, and in that moment, that was our casual reality, is just texting each other about the Red Wings game that night and doing a show and stuff. And, you know, from the bottom of our hearts in this show, we'll always have that memory, Ben, and we have you to thank for it. So, but I don't want to hear your response, because we can't do any more sappy shit. Someone told us that. So I'm going to...
Well, no, I'm not going to get sappy. I'm just going to say, you guys are younger. Nick's a little closer to me, but I know you're still, what are you, 25?
I don't have an AARP card yet like you two, so 27.
So, okay, I was close. You remember Wayne's World?
Yep.
When they like, this can't be the ending. We can't end on, we got to end on something, you know, something different. No, I have no response. You said it all, man. Well said. And that's great stuff.
I'll kick it over to Nick.
Yeah, man.
What do you got?
Well, I think, Ben, I kind of echo Noah's sentiment too, right? Because, to have someone with the stories, the knowledge, just the experience of college hockey and as intimately as you have over your career, to be able to come through on social media and go, hey, you guys want to talk some puck? And, it wasn't just a show, right? Like you said, I remember the group texts and, my phone blowing up like 6 times every 60 seconds.
Yeah.
Whether it was Red Wings or what the heck are the Wild doing? Why can't this guy stop a puck? And, it's those small things that, laser ingrained in your brain. And, to us, I mean, again, we owe so much gratitude. I know that you feel from your position, that you owe us something. I don't look at it that way. I look at so much gratitude on our side to you to be able to have someone on that is as comfortable and as fun and witty. And, it just has stories about stories to tell. Right. And we really can't thank you enough for that. And even more so for me personally, Ben, like even to, have me shout at you, with your days at the Herbrooks National Hockey Center, with all the other guys, that to me, I was a kid in a candy store, being able to stand by, college hockey immortality, really, in my book, and be able to just listen to how you do things and, to kind of, just try to pick your brain a bit of how you approach it and, the emotions that you drive and just really connect you from that. So, no, I thank you. And I know we thank you for coming with the ride that has come to a sunset end, which is goofy. And it hasn't hit me yet. No, it really hasn't. But, it was insane to have you on for the time that we did, really.
Well, it means a lot, Nick, and both you guys. And you know what? Like, I'd say this to you guys, like, sorry, no, I'm going to get sappy. Like you guys did so much work in this thing. I mean, I stand here when the gallery shots up and I look at the graphics you built. People don't realize the work that you guys put into this, man. And, having been fortunate enough to talk for a living for 30 years and see this stuff, and these guys have done an unbelievable job. St. Cloud means the world to both these guys, and they always put out a really good product, and they busted their butts, and they've got jobs and, families and girlfriends and stuff like that, So tip of the hat to you guys, for what you did for the sport. I mean, it's funny. I've been thinking about doing a podcast like this for a couple years, with mainly when I came back from the job in DC, the KHL job. It was like, you know what? I'm just going to do this and see where it goes. But I haven't done it at this point. Maybe I will. But I just think for you guys, the work and the passion and the commitment you put in to your show to give your audience the best you could give them, and you guys truly did that. I saw it before I worked with you, while I worked with you, and it's continued on. So I want people to know that you guys are the two that you guys get all the credit. You should. It's your show. And, I was just happy to be a small part of it with you guys the time I was, man. So, it's cool stuff. You guys you're doing it on your terms. It's funny. My Uncle Bob, man, who's about as politically incorrect as they come, and I love him to death. He's the closest thing I got to a brother. He's my dad's youngest brother. He's the youngest kid in my dad's family. And one time I was up with my parents, Drummond Island, where I used to go with my parents. We didn't go this year because my dad's got some health issues, and him and my mom live 50 feet from me now, so they no longer live in Florida. But it's all good. We're getting him through. But we were up on Drummond Island one summer, 2, 3, 4 years ago, and I was going in a contract negotiation. And my Uncle Bob's like, listen, man, don't take no shit. Don't do it on their terms because their terms suck. You do it on your terms. Now, it doesn't relate to you that way, but the your terms part does, because you guys are making a personal decision, and I respect the hell out of that. And, if life's taught me anything since 2020, when I found out 2 days before Christmas I had a major change in my career, that you can overcome anything, man. And, whatever it is, just keep doing what you love and just keep the passion and the fire and the commitment burning, and you'll be fine, whatever you do.
Appreciate that. No, seriously.
Yeah, man. Yeah.
And as we talked earlier, right, Noah, with Bill Prout, I think it's appropriate to say that, I don't think it's going to hit us for a while, right? I think it's not going to be until maybe, a couple of weeks go by and we go, I feel like you should be doing something, right? It's going to be like that empty feeling. And I know that we will echo this too throughout this last episode here, but this definitely doesn't mean that we're done with Huskies hockey. There's still, I mean, I did the women's games all this year, hoping to continue to do that next year.
Cool.
Trying to, expand the horizons also on the men's side, trying to keep myself busy. So, but I think at the end of it, it's weird how, Noah, that when you look back at where we started, the original idea and what we accomplished and the hard work that we put in, and the people that we met along the way and got to share their stories, their insight, be able to talk shop. I mean, again, we said this with Bill, but it's about the people and it's about the fans first and foremost. And, Ben, I guess I'll leave it with this and to you is, as podcasts go, I think that was our goal from the very get-go was have a little fun, talk about hockey, be right, be wrong here and there, whatever, right? Probably mostly wrong. That's okay. But at the end of the day, we just, we love the sport. We love the game, and this is our avenue to talk about it. And I suppose, from your perspective, did we accomplish that?
100%, man. I mean, you guys always delivered. There's the old saying in hockey, you bring your A game. You guys always brought your A game. That's what I was saying earlier. Like, the work and the graphics, people need to understand that's just not something you just fling in and do in 5 minutes. I mean, that's a lot of work. You got to, design it, and, you got to book guests and, do your prep. I mean, that's the thing too, that's very time consuming, and you guys always did that. Tonight you probably winged it a little bit more than usual. I'm kidding. But, it's
actually no, but
he's not wrong.
That's what I'm saying, right there. You bring your A game every time, man. And, it's cool. Like I said, I'm looking at the graphic here that everyone's seeing, and that's a lot of work.
I'm glad you mentioned it. We'll kind of go through this if we haven't mentioned already, of course, as part of our last show. But this is the graphic when Ben was there. We've had 7 different graphical iterations, so we're running.
Oh wow!
We're gonna run through them all in the last show here. If people haven't gotten a chance to view them on the YouTube channel as well too. But
cool.
I think that's a great closing, guys. And you talk about the other hockey cliche, right? You don't really remember the games that you played in. What do you remember? You remember the road trips, hanging in the hotel with your buddies. That's the shit you remember. And when I think of our guys, that and gals that have come through here, that's kind of what I think of the most. And I think couldn't be a more fitting way to kind of close out this episode, Ben. We thank you so much for being a part of not only the Huskies Warming House podcast, you've even beat out our last guest that we are going to have, which is Brett Larson. You've been on the show more than him, so it's been a hell of a ride.
Bar's a good man. We spent a lot of time on Zooms and calls in that pod, man, and I'm always a fan of him. He's a good man. He's a hell of a coach, and again, social media, seeing his young, his family and his kids, and that's cool stuff. That's what it's all about, man. It's about the family, the connection, like Noah said, the bond we all have. And I wish I always be a fan of the Huskies. You guys know I got a Siberian Husky. I wanted to bring him in here, but I probably should just put a thing of food up here and he'd come up. But anyways, thanks, boys.
Yeah, we can tell you love Brett Larson. You modeled your hair after him, so.
That's all right. Lars is a good man.
Well, that's all we got here, Nick. We're going to kick it on to the next segment of the show. Nick, as always, fun to chat with Ben Holden. Always great things to say. Great friend of the show. Great co-host that we've had as well, too. Final parting thoughts here before we head on to our last show, episode 207.
Yeah, I mean, Ben, it's crazy to think that, for a guy of his caliber, we were able to have him as a co-host for as long as we did. I mean, honestly. And I know that, just talking with him too, right? He thanks us. I don't know if I see it the same way.
Yeah, same.
Just because we're kind of the proverbial outside looking in. But really for him, he's a great dude, straight shooter. Surprised that, he isn't getting more of those top tier type games, just because I think he calls one of the better hockey games out there.
I agree.
That's no disrespect to some of the other broadcasters that I know pretty intimately. I just feel like, just with his knowledge and the stories that he can tell, and just the way that he knows how to shall we say, follow the ebbs and flows of the game, right? I think it's a finesse, it's an art form, and he's mastered that. For him to be a part of our show for as long as it was certainly a treat and something I won't forget.
Yeah, certainly really great memories with him, and always considering him a dear friend. And ultimately, all of what you just said, absolutely correct for me. My dad really likes him, and I really like him too, so that's good enough for me. Really great episode with Ben, and of course, wishing him the best of luck in his future endeavors as we look forward to ours as well. Brett Larson coming up next week for our final show, episode 207. That will do it for episode 206. For Nick Maxon, I'm Noah Grant, and we will see you soon in the den.
One-timer coming, they score! Ripped in! A bomb from Perrix!
So Dana Rasmussen fires and she scores! Dana Rasmussen for the Huskies alongside
Dwayne Kaprizov in for a chance to win it! He scores! Kirill the Thrill is for real! Welcome to the NHL, a game winner!
Cathedral is now 42.6 seconds away from wrapping up the school's first ever title.